So like most people, I saw the remote control Land Raider and the flying repulsor from Ground Effect and thought, that's really cool, but problem is I don't play Space Marines. I play Tyranids. So first step was to get a suitable remote control toy. I found this small hex bug, so I cut out a psychophage body and compared the two. I began to strip down the toy to see just how small I could get it. I soon realized that I wouldn't be able to make this thing turn properly, so removed all the stuff that does that too. I then set about it with my Dremel, cutting up the body, cutting out the pegs, and we had a sort of proof of concept. Next I glued the battery pack down, which almost immediately proved itself to be a mistake and really showed why I need to plan these builds out more. This would not be the last time I regretted a decision in this process. I then carefully cut the carapace from the body and then realized that where I'd put the batteries wasn't going to fit, and in an attempt to cut them free, I cut the wires. So I had to resolder the wires to the battery pack, and whilst I was there, realized that I also had to resolder the motor. After 7 or 8 steps, I was finally back to where I was 7 or 8 steps ago. I also took this opportunity to smooth and sand everything down so that the primer would stick to it better. I then cut the tail off the body, checked the sides, and then proceeded to glue those on, testing constantly to see how they would fit on with the carapace and if I could still access the battery pack. I then went looking for a plate to fill this gap at the front and found this perfect one from Effects. Trimmed it up and then needed to figure out how I was going to attach the carapace to the body. Now I could use magnets, but I decided to go for a trick that I learned from a friend of mine, the storyboard guy, and instead use Lego. I mean, they are designed to click together and come apart again. I glued one stud to the body, stuck the other stud on top, attached some green stuff using some super glue for extra strength, then pressed the carapace on, and once it was dried, I had a solid connection between the carapace and the body. Once that was done, I could glue the tail on and begin sculpting. My two biggest tips that I have for doing green stuff sculpting work both come from Modern Synthesis. One is to always mix your green stuff with some other putty. Epoxy sculpt is a good one, makes it a bit more malleable but still keeps that nice stickiness that green stuff has. Second is to lube your tools with Nivea hand cream, way better than water or Vaseline. Use the green stuff to fill in the gaps between the body and the carapace, placing them on and then blending them in to smooth it out. I realized I needed a few more Tyranid bits on this thing, so I went searching for a few extra plates and carapace pieces and attached those. I then trimmed up the sides of the head and glued it into place. Next step was gap filling. I used plasticard and hot glue for some of the bigger gaps, and then epoxy sculpt for the smaller ones because I find it's better for smoothing things out than green stuff. Then sculpted carapace on the neck and some lumps on its bum. I then realized the sensor couldn't be covered, so I drilled some holes into the carapace. Next was the legs, which was something I'd been dreading up until this point. So I went and found every scything talon I could. Once I'd measured them up and cut them all and glued them into place, I then filled in the gaps and blended them in. This took a lot longer than I expected, because I had to do it in multiple stages. I could only do one leg at a time, because I was in danger of ruining my previous work by putting my stupid thumb in it. It was at this point that I realized that the bottom was looking a bit bland, so I just sculpted a little bit of detail on that. Then to make these sort of internal leg pieces a bit more textured, I used the Yoo-Hoo glue method. Basically, you just put the glue on and let it sit for a minute until it starts to get nice and tacky, and you just spread it back and forth with a toothpick until you get the desired consistency. A lot of people use it for gore effects, and after a quick test run, it was time to paint. So like all my Tyranids, I primed it white, but ended up having to go through again with a brush to make sure the paint got into all the nooks and crannies. Now the base coat for my Tyranids changes slightly from unit to unit, but it's always essentially a gradient of pinks and purples, sometimes reds, sometimes blues. The individual colors and positions changes. For this one I went for purple in the middle, and then, while the paint was still wet, I went back in with a damp brush to slightly feather the edges off to help with the gradient. Whilst the paint was still wet, I wet blended some blue in on the tail. Then a sort of burgundy colour on the base. Then I did a dark purple wash on the inside parts of the legs, and a bright magenta on the face and the legs, continuing to blend them into a gradient. It is at this point in my painting that I always have to remind myself to trust the process. Then the whole model gets a dry brush of a pale flesh tone, and then a glaze of a very thinned out red contrast paint gets put on the legs and all of the little gribbly bits, such as the tentacles. On bigger monsters such as this, I like to go back in and do a highlight of my pale flesh as well, just on some of the flatter areas to really make them pop. I then did a dark violet glaze on all of the talons. To add some more gross detail to this, I added veins using wool, which is my preferred method. All you need to do is basically rip apart some wool and glue it onto the model. And as it dries, you can push it around to shape it better. One tip is to make sure you view your model from every single possible angle, because there will be bits of wool sticking up. You need to make sure that you get those stuck down nice and flat. With the body mostly being warm colours, I tend to go for cool colours for the carapace, so after a black base coat I dry brushed a mid-grey and then a pin wash of bright blue in all the recesses. For the smoke I did a quick gradient dry brush and then applied a blue gradient using glazes and a final highlight dry brush of white. After that, all I had left was to paint a few final details, such as the things in its tentacles and its hundreds of teeth. And then probably the most important tip in making models look gross, at least 2 layers of a gloss coat on anything you want to be nice and sticky and moist. And then, it's done. So I was unsure if I was actually going to put this thing on a base, but then I remembered all those stupid AI videos that people were making of their Warhammer minis walking off their bases, and I realised I had the rare chance to actually do it for real. So I quickly threw together one of my standard Tyranid bases, glued on some random Tyranid bits, primed it, crackle paint, texture paint, paint it black, dry brush with Rakarth flesh, my favourite paint colour, dry brush white onto the bits, and then a quick pink and purple wash. Then add some crimson veins. Touch grass. And that's it, basically. This is my first long form video. I hope you liked it. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and any feedback would be greatly appreciated. Bye!